a century before the world became obsessed with unsolved serial crimes in London and beyond. A quieter, far less famous nightmare was unfolding in the heart of Texas. It happened not in a fog-choked alley, but under the wide-open skies of a young American capital, a city proud of its progress, its new streetlights, and its promise of the future. Between the final months of 1884 and the closing days of 1885, that promise was shattered. Someone, or perhaps more than one person, moved through the darkness of Austin, Texas, leaving behind a trail of terror that police could never fully explain, and a killer's identity that has never been confirmed. This is the story of the Servant Girl Annihilator, one of America's earliest documented serial crime cases, and one of its oldest unsolved mysteries. Just over a year, the city of Austin was gripped by a series of violent nighttime attacks that left several people dead and an entire community living in fear. Newspapers of the time gave the case its chilling nickname, and the story would eventually draw comparisons to a far more famous case that emerged in London only a few years later. But long before comparisons and legends took hold, this was simply a real tragedy, involving real victims, in a real American city struggling to understand a threat it had no framework to investigate. In this documentary, we'll explore what life was like in 1880s Austin, walk through the timeline of events as they were reported, examine how investigators of the era attempted to respond, and look at the historical theories that still circulate today. Just as importantly, we'll separate documented fact from speculation, because responsible history requires that distinction. Austin in the 1880s. To understand the impact of these events, it helps to understand the city where they occurred. In the mid-1880s, Austin was a rapidly growing state capital, home to roughly 15,000 to 17,000 residents. The city was in a period of visible transformation. A new state capitol building was under construction. Electric streetlights, a genuine novelty at the time, had recently been installed in parts of the city, meant to symbolize safety and modern progress. Daily life reflected a community in transition. Many residents worked in domestic service, agriculture, or the trade, supporting a growing government center. Housing ranged from modest cottages to small outbuildings where domestic workers often lived, frequently in less secure structures than the main homes they served. Law enforcement, meanwhile, remained limited by today's standards. Austin's police force was small, poorly equipped for complex investigations, and had no access to the forensic tools we now take for granted. No fingerprint analysis, no forensic labs, and no coordinated criminal databases. Investigations relied almost entirely on witness testimony, physical searches, and local knowledge. It was against this backdrop, a hopeful, modernizing city with an under-resourced police force, that the attacks began. The crimes begin. The violence started at the close of 1884. And continued into 1885 with a series of nighttime attacks primarily targeting domestic workers, many of them young women employed as servants in Austin households. Victims were attacked in or near their places of residence during overnight hours, often in outbuildings or servants' quarters set apart from main houses. As the attacks continued and news spread through the community, fear took hold across the city. Residents reportedly began reinforcing doors and windows, and some families altered their household routines out of concern for the safety of domestic workers living on their property. Local police launched investigations following each attack, questioning witnesses and searching for physical evidence. However, without forensic tools available to later generations of investigators, officers were largely limited to circumstantial leads, which made it exceedingly difficult to link the attacks conclusively or identify a single suspect. As the months passed, the emotional toll on the city deepened. This was no longer an isolated incident, it was a pattern, and Austin's residents understood that whoever was responsible remained unidentified and at large. Investigating a series of connected violent crimes was an unprecedented challenge for an American city of Austin's size in the 1880s. Police methods of the era relied heavily on physical patrols, informant networks, and direct interrogation of possible suspects. Detectives lacked standardized procedures for preserving crime scenes, and the scientific study of physical evidence, fingerprinting, blood typing, and forensic pathology was either in its infancy or did not yet exist in any practical form. Newspapers played an outsized role in shaping public perception. Local and national papers covered the case extensively, and sensational reporting sometimes outpaced confirmed facts, fueling public anxiety and occasionally complicating the work of investigators. Public pressure mounted on city officials to produce results, leading to a series of arrests of possible suspects, most of whom were later released due to insufficient evidence. Despite these efforts, no single suspect was ever definitively tied to the full pattern of attacks through evidence that would meet a modern legal or investigative standard. This left the case without a confirmed resolution, a rarity for its time due to the sheer scale of public attention it received. In the decades since, historians and researchers have proposed a number of theories about who may have been responsible. Some researchers have pointed to specific individuals who were investigated at the time but never charged. Others have suggested the possibility that more than one person was involved. Given inconsistencies in witness accounts, a more speculative theory, discussed by some writers and researchers, considers whether the individual behind these attacks may have later traveled to England, a theory sometimes connected to the unsolved Whitechapel murders that began several years later. It is essential to state clearly, none of these theories have ever been proven. No confirmed evidence links the Austin attacks to any single named individual, and the transatlantic theory in particular remains firmly speculative, built on circumstantial timing rather than direct evidence. Responsible historical analysis requires holding these theories at arm's length, interesting as areas of ongoing research, but not established fact. Regardless of how the case concluded, its impact on Austin was lasting. The attacks prompted public conversations about the safety of domestic workers and the adequacy of city policing over time. They contributed to a broader, gradual push across American cities toward more organized, professional police departments and improved investigative standards. Historically, the case is often cited by researchers as one of the earliest well-documented examples of a serial violent offender in American history. Crediting the term serial killer by nearly a century, it remains a subject of academic and amateur historical interest, studied not for sensational value, but as a window into how communities and institutions respond when confronted with crimes that outpace their available tools. Today's investigators would approach a case like this very differently. Modern forensic science offers tools that simply didn't exist in the 1880s. DNA analysis, digital surveillance, fingerprint databases, and coordinated intelligence communication. Crime scene preservation protocols alone would likely have changed the trajectory of the original investigation. And yet, even with modern technology, some historical cases remain permanently out of reach. Physical evidence has long since degraded or been lost. Witnesses are no longer living, and the passage of over a century makes definitive resolution effectively impossible. The case stands as a reminder that even our most advanced tools cannot always undo the limitations of the past. As we close this chapter, a few reflections are worth carrying forward. Every victim in this case deserves to be remembered with dignity, not reduced to a footnote in a mystery. The advances in forensic science since this case unfolded have transformed how modern investigations are conducted, offering victims and families a far greater chance at resolution today. This case also illustrates the importance of evidence-based policing and the risks that arise when public pressure outpaces careful investigation. It also reminds us that communities grow stronger when they support one another during times of fear, rather than allowing panic to take hold. Responsible journalism then, and now carries a duty to inform without sensationalizing. And when evaluating historical theories, especially those built on speculation rather than evidence, critical thinking remains essential. Finally, some mysteries simply remain unsolved. That, too, is part of history, a reminder of the limits of the evidence we're left with, and the importance of studying the past honestly, without inventing certainty where none exists. More than a century later, the identity of the person or persons responsible for these attacks remains unknown. What survives is not a legend, but a historical record of fear, resilience, and an investigation constrained by the limits of its time. The Servant Girl Annihilator case stands today as one of America's earliest unsolved criminal mysteries, a story that continues to prompt reflection on how far criminal investigation has come, and how some questions from the past may never be fully answered. If you found this history compelling, consider liking this video and subscribing for more historical documentary stories exploring the mysteries that continue to shape our understanding of crime and justice.